Again, good morning, good afternoon. Those that are joining us today, we're incredibly excited to be here with you today to share some of the key findings from the 2025 Sales Performance Scorecard Study that's done by Barry and his team over at Sales Mastery. This is multiple years that we've sponsored this amazing research that Barry is doing with his team at Sales Mastery. I'll let Barry introduce himself in just a moment, but they do amazing work to really understand the key trends that are going on in the sales performance landscape, really understand where sales organizations are struggling, where they're excelling, where they're doing really well. So incredibly excited again to be here and share some of those findings with you and how we can solve for some of those modern sales challenges that organizations are experiencing today. So again, excited to be here. Before we jump into the agenda, I'm going to turn it over to Barry to introduce himself and share some of his background.
Great. Well, thanks, Nick.
Yeah.
I'll try and keep this brief. Introductions, I think less is always more. Probably the most relevant parts. I was a civil engineer for 10 years and did biz dev the latter half of that. So sold professional services and learned there was a whole lot we didn't know about what we were doing. And then joined Miller Heiman. I was with them for several years, and that's when I really learned about sales process and the importance of having a game plan and really a framework that you operate under. When I left when I left Miller Heiman, started a software company, was doing sales process consulting in the 90s and started a software company that got acquired at the very end of the 90s by Goldmine Software. I was VP of North American Sales for them for a few years. And then Jim Dickey and I started CSO Insights as a research firm in 2002. And that company was acquired in 2015 by, coincidentally, by the Miller Heiman Group. And we had a couple year earn out. And then 2017, we started Sales Mastery. The thing that I guess I'll use as a tee up for the part of the presentation I'm going to be doing is in all of our presentations, CSO Insights and then Sales Mastery, we always started with a quote from Edwards Deming, who was the father of the quality movement back in the 80s and 90s. And he said, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And there are lots of opinions about sales and what's changed and what isn't changing. But I'm happy to say that we still have data. We always appreciate the people who complete our survey and be happy to share some of those results today.
Great. Well, thank you, Barry. Thank you for being here and for all the amazing work that you guys do over at Sales Mastery. Again, excited to share some of those key findings today. So I'll introduce myself as well quickly. Co-founder and managing partner at Janik Performance Group, founded Janik 20 years ago, actually in 2005. So excited to share that we celebrated our 20th year in business this year. Prior to that, I was a senior leader and executive at a technology telecom company where we operated both in the US, but also abroad as well, in the Middle East and in Southeast Asia. So I've had an opportunity to see sales across a variety of markets and business segments, B2B, B2C, and just a ton of experience working with senior level executives across multiple organizations over the years. I've had a chance to help lead Janik through a variety of interesting times, going back to the Great Recession, through COVID, and even now through some of the headwinds and challenges we're all likely experiencing. So excited to be with you today, share some of those insights and findings, and talk about what modern sales performance looks like and what it requires, right, to be a top performing sales organization in today's market. So let me quickly share the agenda of what we're going to cover today in the order of that. We'll start off early in this event by talking a little bit about the state of sales in the current market. What were some of those key findings that came out of the survey and the data that Barry and his team put together? So he'll share some of those. We'll talk a little bit about orchestration and our perspective on what that looks like and how that supports modern sales organizations move to high performance. What some of those practical takeaways are, what you can do as a sales leader and as a sales enablement leader in today's market to help enable your organization. And then lastly, we'll open it up to some Q&A. If anybody has some questions that come out of the survey results, or just out of our perspective, would love to share, to work through those and share any responses to questions that come in throughout today's webinar. So I'll turn it over to Barry to talk a little bit about some of those key findings.
Great. Well, thanks. The thing that really jumped out of the data this year is that sales continues, B2B sales, and I should preface this by saying all of our work is in B2B. We don't do anything with CPG. We don't do anything with B2C. Very little of a B2B2C, but for all intents and purposes, just think of this as strictly B2B. And, people talk about everything that's changing in sales. A lot of things are changing, but one of the ones that really jumped out at us is the sales cycle length and how long it's taking to complete sales. There are really two things that I'll be emphasizing today. One is the length of the sales cycle, and the other is there's been a lot of success at the top of the sales funnel, but we're seeing that there are some challenges closing things out at the bottom of the funnel. This chart that you're looking at right now is comparing 2024 to 2025, 2024 being the navy blue bars and 2025 being the orange bars that you see here. And this is selling to new prospects, and it starts at less than a month, 1 to 3 months, 4 to 6, and so on, 10 to 12 months, and greater than 1 year. And you can see that the orange bars are leaning or favoring the right of this scale versus the navy blue bars that are favoring the left, or shorter sales cycles. So it's just taking longer, and certainly there are a lot of reasons for that. I think the phrase that everyone has heard over and over again over the last several months with the tariffs and geopolitical upheaval and so on is business hates uncertainty. And there's been so much uncertainty that people either are stalling out or waiting or are more risk averse than ever. I mean, they're just all of these things that are sort of combining to drag things out, slow things down. It's always been true that selling to new prospects takes longer than selling to existing ones for obvious reasons. They're familiar with your product, they're familiar with your people, you're familiar with their business and their customer, and so on. But it really is becoming an issue. At least in our view, it's a thing that needs to be addressed. This is looking at selling to new prospects. The next slide is looking at selling to existing customers. And here you can see there's, again, the orange bars, the 2025 bars are favoring or leaning to the right, if you will. And that means it's taking longer and longer. But the one that really is eye-catching here, if you look at 10 to 12 months, last year's data, was like 1% or 2% of existing customer sales cycles took that long. And now it's nearly 10%. And that's an enormous change. And so I think it suggests a few things. There's certainly this whole issue of uncertainty, risk aversion, and so on. But we think there may be some other issues, and the next few data points speak to those in terms of how stuff gets into the funnel, the velocity moving through the funnel, and then finally what comes out the other end of the funnel. And those numbers are pretty revealing as well. So why don't we take a look at those?
Yeah.
Here we've got all 4 of the things that we look at, which is the initial inquiry to first discussion to education. I need to expand this and make it larger so I can read it. Sorry, I thought I had this set up. Let me go back there. Okay. first discussion to education, education to proposal, and proposal to close. And again, you want to see things leaning to the right. This actually takes a little bit of explanation because these are percentages of percentages. So on the x-axis, we're looking at, in the upper left-hand corner, qualified leads leading to a discussion. Okay, so less than 25%, 25 to 50%, 50% to 75, and greater than 75. And so you want to see these bars, again, favoring the right, which means you've got, higher hit rates, higher success rates, if you will, passing on to the next stage. And that scale is the same for each of these 4 quadrants. The vertical scale is also percentages. So again, percentage of a percentage. So if we just stay with qualified moving to discussions, less than 25% are moving. We see in 2024, that was about 31, 32%, basically a third. And in 2025, just slightly more, 33, 34%, roughly a third of all qualified leads moving to discussion did so less than 25% of the time, less than a quarter of the time. And what you see over at the far right side is greater than 3/4 of the time. There's about a 50% jump. Sorry, a percentage of a percentage of a percentage. There's a big jump in those moving on to qualified discussions. And then moving to the right, discussions to education. Again, we see big jump at the high end. And then lower left-hand corner, education leading to proposal. Again, big jump. And then we get to the end of the process, proposal to close. This is when you want to see an even bigger jump, and instead it falls off. You can see 2025 is lower in each of the 3 higher categories, 25 to 50, 50 to 75, and greater than 75. In each case, it's falling off. And so it's like, yeah, we're making great progress, and then it washes out. And the challenge with, there are a number of challenges, but one of the disheartening things about that is it's looking so good right up until it isn't.
Exactly.
And of course, that's disappointing for everyone. We'll get to forecasting in a minute, but Nick, did you have anything you wanted to add to this?
No, this was some of the more eye-opening data when you and I, Barry, talked about this, and I reviewed this content in advance. But I think what you said is so true. I think as the revenue enablement organization is looking at this, and their marketing and sales are working closely together to make sure that the leads that are being generated are of high quality. They look like they are, right? And in all intents and purposes, you could make the argument that whatever they're putting in the funnel is of reasonable quality. They're moving through the earlier stages of the sales process with a high degree of effectiveness. And that, year over year, that has dropped off to some degree, but overall has been moving pretty well until the later stages of the sales process. And that's when you see it really drop off. Again, I think that speaks to the market, apprehension, more, broader decision-making criteria, more people involved in the decisions, more risk adversity. I think it's all those things that you talk about, which to us as a sales performance organization says sellers need to be better equipped than they've ever needed to be, right? They need to have the right tools. They need to have the right skills. They need to be able to have the right conversations at the right time, now more than ever, right? And to us, this says there likely is an execution gap. There's something that the seller isn't equipped to do, right? You have to be able to overcome that. And I'm not saying it's not challenging, and I'm not saying it's not continuing to get more challenging, right? But there has to be ways to overcome that and be able to move those later stage deals through the pipeline and into a closed won category.
Well, the other thing, and this maybe is a segue into the next slide as well, but it's enormously costly. In fact, I think we should jump to this next slide, the outcome of forecast deals. Yeah. It's enormously costly to pursue drag deals through the pipeline, down through the funnel, only to have them fall out. And when we look at the outcome of forecast opportunities, and I always have to stress when I present this data, we're talking about forecast opportunities. Okay, the figures you're seeing here are not pipeline, it's forecast. And of those deals that made it to that last stage where we're forecasting them, 46% are won, 24% were lost, and 30%, 3 out of 10, went to no decision. And that's up again from last year. Last year, the one figure was 46, but the no decision versus competitive loss was 27% for each of those. This year, the competitive losses figure went down, the no decision figure went up. And the thing that there are two things about this that are both stressful and costly. When they're going through the process, and especially when they get, to proposal and hopefully closing, they're much more visible. People are starting to count on them because you're forecasting them. It's like the business is starting to look at these and really gear up for, and expectations are increasing and so on. Lots of management visibility and attention and so on. And so the further you go through the sales process, the more resources, the more time, the more investment is being made in every one of these opportunities. And so when it falls out or just, kind of evaporates, no decision, that's costly. But even more so, those figures pale in comparison to the opportunity count cost of real deals, real opportunities that are still out there that are not being pursued or not being identified and addressed because the resources to do so are being consumed by these 54% of opportunities, and in particular, this 30% of opportunities that are basically going nowhere. That to me is huge, flashing red light that says you need to pay attention to this. And, we've been saying this for years, that forecast accuracy is an oxymoron. But beyond that, beyond being clever or cynical or whatever, is if you really look at where the investment and the time, energy, and resources going and what the outcomes are, this needs attention for sure.
Yeah, it becomes critically clear the importance of qualifying early and qualifying often. It's not just about doing it early to potentially get opportunities out of the funnel. That's important, but it's also having the skill and the capability to be able to qualify throughout the sales process stages to make sure that you're investing the least amount of time as needed, right, within reason. You don't want to just qualify out and when there really is an opportunity there, but you certainly want to make sure you're doing that as a consideration of resources that organizations are putting in. And there's this huge leadership visibility on these deals that are in forecast, and if they're not real deals or real opportunities, you have to be able to know that as early as you can in the sales process.
Yeah, there are two things I would say about it. One is because we identify, it's not just us, I mean, in general, early stages are considered qualification. I think people think, well, okay, we've gotten through that stage. Wow. And in fact, I just want to reinforce what you're saying. The qualification has to happen throughout the sales process. I had one VP of sales who said he was always looking exit for door. He always wanted his people looking for, is there a reason we should not be in this deal? Let's identify that early rather than waiting till the very end. The other thing, I used to do sales training and certainly in consulting. There are sales reps who are carrying deals along that if you said, look, you can get rid of any deal in your pipeline and not get in trouble. Just rigorously, honestly, judiciously judge these things and toss the ones that you think, or if you made one more call and it's not going anywhere, get rid of it. I think 30% of deals would be gone overnight. Yeah. But because, people are always supposed to be putting more stuff in, and people operate with bogus rules of thumb, like you should have 4X in your pipeline and all of that. People hang on to things when they really shouldn't. And they should be, judiciously getting after and screening things out. But that's not the way it tends to operate.
No doubt. Yeah, and that doesn't even consider the when these deals are not closing, they're moving to no decision, they're moving to lost at a higher rate than we've seen historically in quite some time. Now there's a cost consideration for the morale of the organization and
Absolutely.
effectiveness and productivity of your sellers. And if they're not hitting quota consistently, there could be a turnover issue, and the cost of hiring is tremendous, right? So it's just there's so many factors, right, as a need to try to
Absolutely.
increase these rates and put your sellers and sales leaders in the best position to be as effective as possible. From our experience, when you think about the challenges and why this is happening, we don't view this as a motivation problem or a lack of investment. Certainly, to us, we believe that it's more of a design problem in the way that you are implementing all of these solutions to be able to give sellers what they need when they need it. But for so many years, and this even speaks to what you were just saying, Barry, organizations have built the systems around the business and less around the people. So more around the reporting, the inspection of training, the tools. I mean, this speaks to even just the way that they're forecasting this and the focus of leadership on the deal itself, not the quality of the deal or not what needs to happen inside the deal to make sure that it moves forward. It's more about the outcomes. But now more than ever, we believe that sellers need the guidance and they need the tools and they need the support because deals are becoming more and more complex and driving value is more important than it's ever been. So I guess what is the result of that? In our experience, they're overloaded with revenue responsibility. They're in many cases undercoached and they're operating mostly solo, right? I mean, they have some support, but sales leaders are worn thin. They're really focused on forecast and outcomes. They're less focused on coaching. So you have what you end up with is a disparate level of systems and process and tools that don't really work together. And they're certainly typically not built into the flow of work. You just layer things on top of things. And the scorecard indicates that sales organizations aren't failing because of a lack of investment in talent or tools. We believe it's because of just the way in which all of these things are being executed, right? Despite record investments in enablement, in AI tools, technology, performance continues to decline, right, over the last few years. So ultimately, we believe there's an execution gap, right? There is the space between what we want sellers to do and what they should know and what they're actually doing in the sales process when it matters most. There's a gap, and that gap is widening, right? And the research speaks to that. That these systems were not designed for execution, they were designed more for oversight, right? Less on execution. And we're seeing that in the field more and more today. So here's a quick illustration of how we see this. But from our experience, the challenge is without a conductor, without somebody leading this or bringing all this together, these valuable instruments that we're providing to sales organizations end up just creating a lot of noise, right? Ultimately, your CRMs, your LMS, your analytics tools, the training that you're providing, all of them are powerful alone, but fragmented, they become overwhelming for sellers, and ultimately they're just ineffective. So from our perspective, it's really about defining, helping organizations define those capabilities that sales organizations need. What should they be focused on when they're implementing this system that helps orchestrate these capabilities, process, data, skills, tools, and coaching in harmony, right, to be able to create sales as a symphony. One unified experience for sellers in the flow of work with complete visibility for leaders that gives sellers what they need at the right time so they are executing the plays in sync, driving better execution at scale across organizations. The good news is, AI is enabling sales organizations now to actually be able to do this in a highly effective way at scale. Never before have we really been able to do that. It's challenging. There's all these tools. And what most sales organizations are guilty of is just continuing. Let's another tool. Let's throw another thing. Let's do another training program. And again, not to say that those things aren't effective in their solo use, but when they're connected and they're operating together, that's when we see high-performing sales organizations really excel.
Well, let's see it because we're ready for some good news.
Exactly. I know, right? It seems grim up until this point. But It's really not. There's a lot of great things that sales organizations are doing, and there's a lot of really high performance we're seeing. Unfortunately, some of the trends and some of those later stage deals ultimately affect forecast and outcomes, right? Like you mentioned, Barry. So I thought it would be helpful to share what we define as our sales enablement model, like what high performing sales organizations are doing and what they should be focused on. And I wanted to take a few minutes and just walk through some of these core components to help share what high performing sales organizations are looking at, what makes up a world-class modern sales execution model. So you notice that the first thing you might draw your attention to is the seller is at the center of this model, right? The seller is at the center. Now you might be thinking to yourself, I mean, I've seen a lot of models over the years. Normally the customer is supposed to be at the center, not the seller is at the center. And listen, you're absolutely right to have that thought. And we don't dispute that in any way. Our sales methodologies have always started with the customer, because they should be the catalyst for high performing sellers, selling skills, and sales methodology. But this is a little different. This isn't that. This is a sales execution model, and it creates a system that enables those skills to come to life, right? One that puts the seller at the intersection of the right process, tools, skills, and technology, right? So our research shows that high performing sales teams aren't necessarily the most tenured. They may not be the most tech enabled, but they're really the most aligned, right? They're taking the time to unify these processes and make sure that all of it is connected into one, execution system across the organization. So I thought it'd be helpful to just walk through some of these layers in the middle of the circle, if I could, and explain what we believe are the components of the capabilities of high performing sales organizations. So the first thing is practice, right? This is all about safe rehearsal. This is where sellers can build confidence before it really matters, before it counts, in a safe environment. Now, AI is really helping with this tremendously because you're able to do AI-driven role plays, simulations, and get expert feedback, whether it's from the AI directly based on teaching it, whether it's from managers, right, and linking those systems as well. But it allows sellers to be able to rehearse before high stakes calls, sharpen their fluency, and reduce deal risk. Like imagine an environment where a Slack notification comes in or a CRM notification comes in, and it's asking the seller to rehearse their negotiation before tomorrow's meeting, right? They can spend time. That data is being brought in from CRM. They see exactly what's going on in that opportunity. Now, ultimately, it's practice that is embedded in reality, right? AI is amplifying a seller's ability to be able to practice so they can show up more consistently and more confidently before their calls. So that's one key enablement area. Go ahead, Barry.
I'm going to jump in because practice is so important. We were talking before we started here about, go Dodgers, the World Series, but,
Yes.
the NFL series season has started and they practice all week for the one game, the 1 hour of play during the weekend. And it's all about practice. And you've always heard, practice makes perfect. That's not true. Practice makes permanent. If you're doing something wrong and you practice it over and over, you can do it wrong every time. Perfect practice makes perfect, and having coaching, having feedback, all of that. I used to ask VPs of sales this all the time. Where do your sales reps practice? And the answer always is, in front of the customer. That's where they're practicing. And this one VP of sales said, "Holy cow, we're playing with live ammo." It's like, yeah, you are. I mean, it's just, and I think the fact that people can now do role plays, during training, I don't like role plays, it's artificial, it's not my deal. But now with AI, you really can. And I think it's spectacular.
I couldn't agree more. That was primarily how organizations and sellers have done it over the past. It was in a training class, right, potentially, or it was in a one-on-one. The frequency was low, and the quality of those is subjective, right? So it's challenging. This allows a seller in real time to really sharpen their skills right before, right? If again, to me, it's a game changer, right, in terms of really being able to maximize performance and give the sellers the practice they need. Application is the next enablement area. This is really where process and skills show up. live in front of the customer. So think like guided templates, tools, call planning tools, negotiation tools, account planning tools. But think about how effective it is where an AI tool can walk a seller through that process directly in their CRM or in the flow of work, using either real voice or just filling out a lot of that information in the past, but being able to enable a seller to plan and make sure that they're fully prepared. This really brings that methodology from the class into the real world, right? I've always said, if training that doesn't translate to application in the field isn't enablement, it's shelfware. And at the end of the day, how many binders just sit on a shelf? How many tools just sit on a shelf? This allows the seller to really start to focus on application of those skills and bring it into real world scenarios. Coaching is all about performance at scale, right? So how can we multiply the impact of managers and make coaching more consistent and not ad hoc, right? How does coaching typically happen now? You're waiting for a pipeline review, you're waiting for a weekly or bi-weekly meeting, and sometimes you get to coaching. Most of the time, you're just reviewing deals, right? That's normally how things just tend to work. So we also understand that now more than ever, sellers need the right guidance. They need the right support. Deals are becoming more complex. So with the assistance of AI and having the right platforms in place, great coaching doesn't need to happen in small intervals over time. It can happen all the time in the moment when a seller needs it most. It could be proactive, not just reactive. It can be, it can make those recommendations in real time. And ultimately, what does that do? That becomes a force multiplier for managers. They can focus less on some of the day-to-day nuance of coaching and focus more on high-stakes coaching, focus on larger deals, different opportunities. So it really frees up time, but also still gives the seller the coaching they need day-to-day when they're in the middle of critical moments in the sales process on real opportunities. Continuous learning is the next capability that you see that's defined in this model. Modern sellers just learn differently. We're seeing that in all the research. They don't want to only sit through long sessions or e-learning modules. Not that those things aren't valuable, and they absolutely serve a purpose, and there's a huge need for that. But they also expect learning to come to them in the moment, in small doses, and in the flow of work. Continuous learning is, in our definition, is all about short, bite-sized, actionable learning when the seller needs it. Related to the sales opportunity, that's ultimately what a seller wants. What do I need to do next? How can I better enable myself to maximize this opportunity and increase the likelihood of success? So it really needs to be adaptive. It needs to be hyper-personalized. It needs to be always on, right? A platform that is assessing skill, understanding and identifying gaps, and then serving the learning that seller needs, right? Not just role, not just a learning path. I mean, those things are, again, also very important to create consistency, but what does that seller need day to day to help increase the likelihood of these opportunities that are being stalled, that are not working as effectively as they could?
Well, I think the other point you make, being served up rather than them having to search for it, a tremendous amount of time has been wasted with sellers searching for whatever content, presentations, proposal outline, whatever. If a system can serve up what they need when they need it, that would be enormous.
Yeah, and specifically to what they need as well. It's not just take this general, workshop or this. It really does serve content in a way that feels hyper personalized and very specific to that individual seller's gaps. Automation is the next capability that high-performing sales organizations really need to focus on. And listen, research tells us sellers spend about 2/3 of their given week not selling. They're doing administrative tasks. They're entering information into CRM. They're filling out a planning tool, whatever. By automating these tasks, it gives them a ton of time back. And by having the right platform in place, you can help automate those repetitive tasks, the administrative tasks, and surface the right content, make sure it's integrated into existing systems. Ultimately, what does that do? That reduces friction. There's less context switching if you're able to put all of this in one place, sort of one sheet of glass that a seller is in every single day. And what the research also tells us is, and the data tells us, that sellers are just exhausted by tool overload, right? So simplification and automation really is the antidote to that. more customer time, less drag, more productive and effective sellers, right? So thinking about automating their tasks and moving tools to a place where they're more proactive and not reactive. Measurement is another capability. This is really where we're tying visibility into accountability. So dashboards, analytics, just trying to connect the right behaviors directly to outcomes and showing leaders what's working, where the gaps exist, where to coach, and also informing the platform of this and the AI of this as well. So that's going to help serve up the right learning content, the right tools, the right guidance and advice in the sales process, right? It's all about measuring the effectiveness of what the seller's doing day to day. And the last capability is about reinforcement, right? Making sure that skills stick, that processes stick and become permanent and institutional capabilities within an organization. So we have the capability of delivering, ongoing reinforcement, nudges, content refreshers, scenario-based prompts, recommendations for role play, right? It's really about helping forget the learning curve or improve the learning curve, and making sure that what you're delivering, whether it's skills, process, methodology, is translating into the real world. And that's all about reinforcement, right? You can't take one golf lesson and expect to be a pro, right? You implement skills, you keep working on those skills, and reinforcement helps do that in a consistent way over time. So it's really these 7 capabilities that form an ecosystem that surround the seller, right? One that delivers value in and of itself, but also ties all of these things together to make sure that they're orchestrated, they're done at scale, they're delivered together, and most importantly, in the flow of work. Okay. So that's what we see. You notice some of the other outer rings. I'm not going to go into those details as well, but there certainly are some best practices that help support the design and implementation of the skills, of the technology, and of the delivery and the design to make sure that, again, they're hyper-personalized, they're focused on the right content, they're connecting to the right competencies. So there's some other considerations as well.
I think every one of those elements is key. I mean, really, when you look at it, coaching is key, reinforcement is key, measurement is key. It's just work to do.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, and I would seek to venture, and if I was a betting man, I would say most of the enablement leaders and sales leaders that are on our call today or that will listen to this post are doing a lot of those things, right? And doing many of those things, maybe to some degree better in some areas than others. We wanted to highlight the areas you should focus on and what those capabilities are. Most importantly, though, are they connected? Are they in the flow of work? Are you bringing all those things together in a formal way to create sales orchestration at scale? If they're disparate, you're putting roadblocks in front of your sellers, right? Like they have to go from one area to another. They're not connected. They're not speaking the same language. A lot of double work, a lot of additional administration, and ultimately they're not being maximized, right? It really is all about harnessing the power of AI and putting these things in the right platform to make sure that they're all speaking to each other and staying connected.
Yep.
So how do those capabilities translate to solving some of the challenges, Barry, that you shared earlier, right? We talked about longer sales cycles, stalled deals, et cetera. So when you think about shortening the sales cycle, we have to make sure that sellers are prepared and they're confident, right? And they have the right guidance in the right moment to be able to win those critical moments in the sales process, right? And really be able to do that effectively. So they need to have the right practice, they need to have the right application, and make sure that the skills and process that you're recommending are being performed consistently and applied with confidence, right? And so from our research, we see that when those things are operating in symphony, sales cycles are shortening, right? Then we are seeing those things having an impact, right, in terms of seller performance. Deals are moving faster, right? They're not stalling at the same degree as they were before because sellers have the right processes, they have the right messaging, right? So it's really about the right, formula, but it's also about implementing it in a way that sellers can enable that and take action on those things consistently. That results in improving forecast, right? Because there's better visibility. We're connecting better to outcomes with the right measurement processes, but ultimately we have a better handle on the deals, right, that are in the pipeline and that are in the forecast because we understand more effectively where we are in the sales process, what feedback are we getting from our customers, right? So we're able to take action on those deals and either qualify them in or move them out of the pipeline more effectively. And then lastly is just underutilized technology. I know that that's talked about in the report and something that we see consistently across virtually all sales research. You know, another piece of tech can be incredibly valuable, but it can also be a deterrent, right? Ultimately, if tech is embedded in workflow and it's working in symphony across all of your tech stack, that's going to simplify what a seller has to do and ultimately reduce the noise, right, that sellers have by being able to connect those things into one consistent sales performance system. Barry, anything you would add there?
There are a couple of things that you've talked about, and it'd be great if the technology supported it as well. But we have found that those companies that reinforce training and continue training, both sales training and tech training, people actually using the tools that they have available to them, is super effective, super useful over time. Just dumping these tools on people and it's intuitively obvious. It's not intuitively obvious. I'll just say that. So the reinforcement, the ongoing, I think it's a culture actually, that this is how we show up. This is what we do. These are the tools we provide, and we want to make sure you know how to use them. All of that, I think, is part of the conversation.
It is, yeah, and you can't lose sight of that. It's not just about linking all these things together and leveraging AI and the right technology. It is also about ensuring that those capabilities are analyzed, are considered, and you're delivering the right information to the sellers that they truly need in your sales environment, right? Okay, great. Well, that allowed us to go through the research. If you want to grab a copy of the 2025 SPS scorecard, the full scorecard, there's a ton of really great, rich data in the results that were shared by Barry and the team. You can scan this QR code here if you want to grab a copy of that. We'll also provide a copy with the recording through the Zoom link as well, so you'll be able to download a copy there. But if you want to grab it quickly as well, you can also review some additional information there on our Genius platform, our AI platform that does orchestrate that sales as a symphony, as I mentioned earlier, bringing those capabilities together and linking it to Janek's proven sales methodologies and our content and IP. If you want to learn more about our Genius platform, you could do that by scanning the QR code as well and learning more about how we can better enable the sales organization.
Hey, Nick and Barry, before we sign off, we do have a couple questions. So there are some environmental issues that salespeople can't control, political, economic. What skills do you feel salespeople must become better at or become better at qualifying prospects?
I love the things that you can't control. It's great to identify the things you can control. I did a video on circle of concern versus the circle of influence and circle of control. And you want to focus your energy on those things you can control. I think there are two things. Everybody talks about all the change that's taken place over there. Are two things that haven't changed. And they are the questions that buyers have in mind when you first come in. What do you know about me? What do you know about my business? And so I would say that in terms of what you can do to become better at qualifying is become more knowledgeable, not just about your products, but about your customers and your customers' customers and the outcomes they're looking for in their business. Business acumen is huge. That's what people want to hear about and know that you understand and can impact. And so I would say really doing your homework in advance. And AI is a huge benefit now in terms of pre-call research. Plug in a URL and you can write a GPT that will just do all of your homework in, seconds, stuff that used to take, in some cases, hours, or not, you may not even find it. Now it's there. So your ability, number one, to care enough to have the research served up. Number two, to take the time to go through it. Number three, to actually understand it is, I think, going to take you miles down the road toward qualifying. The second thing that hasn't changed is Okay, they want to know, what do you know about me? What do you know about our business? What do you know about your competition? But the other thing is, buyers are everybody is scared to death that if they take time with a seller, they're going to waste their time. That hasn't changed. People do not want to waste their time. And I would say that has only become hyper sensitive, uber sensitive to people not wanting to waste their time. That's why they're always putting up all these barriers and shielding themselves. So if you can demonstrate that you are going to add value and not waste their time, I think that's going to be huge in terms of qualifying and engaging.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I know we're at time, but Nick, I think this might be a good one just to kind of end with was, if sales leaders could only focus on one improvement in Q4, should it be funnel health, coaching, or technology alignment, or something else?
Yes, I mean, that's a great question. It depends on the priorities of that organization. It's hard to say any one of those things is most important, but from my perspective, to me, out of those three that were mentioned, I would say coaching out of those, just because I think that can have the most immediate impact on deal outcomes as organizations are moving into the fourth quarter. I mean, funnel health and all those things are critically important so you can forecast more effectively and make sure you're working the right opportunities. But to me, if you can get the right coaching embedded within the organization as quickly as possible, whether that's supported by AI, which I strongly recommend just for scale, but also with frontline managers that are doing that consistently, I think that could make the most immediate impact on Q4 and end of year results.
Wonderful.
Great. Well, thanks, Prima, for moderating those questions. I think we're at time now. So I do want to give a big thanks to Barry for joining us on this webinar today and for all the research that you and Sales Mastery does. Really great findings and great to see how you continue to keep your finger on the pulse in terms of high-performing sales organizations and what organizations are experiencing there. So again, thank you so much for joining. And a big thanks to the audience, everybody that was on with us today. Thank you so much for sharing your time and for continuing to make the investment in high-performing sales. We appreciate it. And thank you again for joining. Have a great rest of your day.